Welcome to the 2021 Nautilus Book Awards Author Spotlight Series. I'm your host, Christine Upchurch. Now celebrating 21 years of honoring better books for a better world, Nautilus Book Awards continues to embrace books from a wide spectrum of the publishing industry. Books which radiate hope and wisdom. Books which nurture our inner connection and inspire us to connect together as individuals, as communities, and as planetary citizens. This is a vast conversation, one which is more important today than ever before. Today, we are focusing the spotlight on Lydia Denworth. She's a gold winner in the category of relationship and communication for her book entitled Friendship: The Evolution, Biology, and Extraordinary Power of Life's Fundamental Bond. Lydia Denworth is an award-winning science journalist and speaker. She's a contributing editor of Scientific American. Her work has appeared in The Atlantic, New York Times, and other publications. She's the author of acclaimed books on popular science, I Can Hear You Whisper, and Toxic Truth. And again, she is a gold winner for her book entitled Friendship: The Evolution, Biology, and Extraordinary Power of Life's Fundamental Bond. I'd like to welcome Lydia Denworth. And Lydia, nice to see you, and congratulations on your Gold Award.
Thank you so much, Christine. It's great to be with you.
You know, I was fascinated with the approach you took to this book. I know that when talking about friendship, there's the psychological information out there. There is the sociological aspects of it. And I've seen plenty of information out there about that, but you took a different, more scientific approach. What inspired you to do that?
Well, first of all, I am a science writer by profession, and my job really is to go out and talk to scientists and learn what they think is interesting, what especially intrigues me is what they talk about amongst themselves. And so I did before the coronavirus, I went to a lot of conferences, I listened to scientists, and I found about 6 years ago, I was at a social neuroscience conference and they were talking about friendship the whole time. And that really surprised me. There was this other element to friendship, the biology and evolution of it. And I thought that if I, as a science journalist, was unaware of that was kind of deeper level of friendship, then probably most other people were too. And so I thought that even though there is so much out there on friendship, this was something that wasn't out there and where I could really make a contribution.
Yeah, and I have to tell you, most of that information that I read in your book, I had never heard before. And I was really fascinated because at the beginning of your book, it starts out with you going to this island to observe monkeys. Why monkeys?
Monkeys, because some of the biggest sort of advances in this science in the last 20 years have come in other species. And the whole reason that's important is because finding friendship or something like it in other species is what has told us that this is not just cultural. This is not just a byproduct of human language and civilization. It's deeper than that. It's more fundamental, and that there's a universal story to friendship. And so the book starts with these monkeys on an island in Puerto Rico, where a whole series of scientists, neuroscientists, behavioral ecologists, primatologists, they're all there, and they're studying these animals and their social behavior really to try to learn about friendship and what friends are really for.
Yeah. So one of the scenes, I think you're actually going to read from this in the book that I found fascinating, having had teenage boys at one point, is you came back home and you were looking at your son. Can you read us that passage, please?
Sure. Yeah, so I had spent a week in Puerto Rico, and this is when I get back. When I got home to Brooklyn from Puerto Rico, I found my then 17-year-old son, Jacob, playing NBA 2K with his best friend, Christian. They were sprawled next to each other on the couch, long legs spread in front of them, controllers in hand, looking at the screen. Empty sandwich wrappers and juice bottles were strewn about, evidence of an earlier run to the deli. There was so much that was familiar about this site. It felt like they might not have moved in the week I was gone. They had just graduated from high school, and this, punctuated by a few rounds of 2-on-2 basketball in the yard, was how they were spending their days. It had been driving me nuts. On some levels, I knew that wasn't fair. The summer after senior year should be a time of rest and relaxation, a rare break between the hard work of high school and starting college. Still, I couldn't stand it. The reasonable adult in me rebelled. Surely their days should consist of something more than this. How was it possible to spend so many hours sitting around doing essentially nothing? And then it hit me. Maybe they weren't doing nothing. My time watching the macaques changed how I saw these teenage boys' behavior. Look at the proximity. They sat physically very near each other, just as bonded monkeys do. Listen to the banter. Even while playing video games, they were communicating, laughing, commenting on both the game and on life, trash talking a little now and then. They were doing the human equivalent of grooming. More significantly, like young male macaques, they were on the verge of leaving the group they'd grown up in to make their way in the wider world. They were leaving their families and they were leaving each other. And that wasn't going to be easy, which made this time together all the more precious. Friendship is so familiar and such a part of our day-to-day lives that it's easy to assume we know all about it. We don't. And we think we appreciate it. We don't, not fully. Even I, who was spending my days reporting on friendship, talking to scientists about social interaction, still missed it. I saw the video games the boys were playing and not the visceral connection between them. It is a mistake that too many of us make too often in a variety of contexts, as parents, as spouses, as friends. It's time to bring friendship to the foreground, to see it for what it is. It actually is a matter of life and death. It is carried in our DNA, in how we're wired. Social bonds have the power to shape the trajectories of our lives. And that means friendship is not a choice or a luxury. It's a necessity that is critical to our ability to succeed and thrive. It can even be a model against which other relationships should be measured. Our social lives have a backstory, and it's time that story was told.
I love that. I love that. That sort of scene was very familiar in my house as well. And I love that the context you put that in. And you do mention that it's really life or death, and it does relate to health. Can you give us some examples of how friendship is important for our health and well-being?
Over the long haul, friendship is as important as diet and exercise for your health. And when I say that, I mean literally, you are more likely to die earlier if you are lonely or socially isolated. And we've heard that, we've seen that in the headlines, but what we really think about is that friendship and sort of having good, strong bonds is the flip side. It's the other side of the continuum. And so the things that friendship on one end or loneliness on the other affect are our cardiovascular function, our immune system, so our resilience or susceptibility to viruses and inflammation. It affects our risk of dementia, our cognitive health. It affects our mental health, our risk of depression. It affects our stress responses, the quality of our sleep, and even the rate at which our cells age. So lonelier people are biologically, their cells are aging a little bit faster all of this is true for monkeys and apes and other species, as well as for humans. So in fact, the monkeys that I spoke about earlier, that's how we figured this out, that monkeys baboons in Africa with the strongest positive bonds, the ones that are nicest to each other the most often, live longer and have more and healthier babies. And so reproductive success and longevity are evolutionarily, that's the whole game. That's what we're after. And so this is what is telling us that our social relationships matter so much more than we thought.
That's absolutely fascinating. And is there a difference between friends who are not relatives and relatives? Is there something unique about that kind of connection?
What really matters is the quality of the relationship. And it matters less who you have it with, actually. I mean, of course, there are things that we get from biological relatives that are different and from romantic partners that don't exist in a friendship. But it turns out that the relationships that have the most import for our health have to do with the sort of the qualitative definition of the relationship. So if it's long lasting and stable and steady, if it's positive, so it makes both individuals feel good, and if it's cooperative and reciprocal, those are the things the minimum requirements. And that can be your spouse or not. I mean, some of us call our spouse our best friend, and some of us maybe not so much, or your siblings. When you tell me that your spouse is your best friend or your sister is your best friend, you're telling me that to tell me a kind of value added statement about the relationship. Because if just sister is categorical, right? But friend tells me that this is special, that there's something deeper there. And it's that quality of the relationship that determines our health.
So you talk about there being neuroscience that looks at how the brain and friendship interact. What is it about the neuroscience that's been studied, and can you offer an example or two of what they've found?
I mean, there's so much that they're looking at all the ways in which our brains are processing social information all the time. So, for a long time, neuroscientists were studying things like learning and memory. And now we understand that the social work that our brain is doing is a big part of what is happening in all different parts of our brain. But one of the things that I thought was the most fascinating and surprising in the work that I looked at for the book was that neuroscientists have kind of combined what's called social network analysis. So that's using really powerful computing that we now have to sort of trace the relationships among large groups of people. And then they've combined that with looking at those people's brains inside a scanner. And what they did was they showed them videos, a set of videos, and pulled like different kinds of things from the internet. So some, comedy clips and news clips and things that were a little bit sappy, or things that were really serious about different kinds of subjects. And what they could see was that the way people in the scanner processed the videos that they were watching, so really their auditory attention, their visual attention, it was very, very similar to the people that they were closest to in this large group it was a group of graduate students in a program actually at a university. And so they took maybe 200 people, and what they could do is just by looking at how their brains processed these videos, they could predict who was friends with who. And it sort of fell off at 3 degrees of separation. So you were your brain processing was most similar to your closest friends, and then a little bit more similar, a little less similar to your next tier. And then after that, not so much. And what this is both kind of predictable and profound, because we have known all the way back to Aristotle and the philosophers who thought about friendship that similarity is an important part of it. But I don't think that any of us really thought it went right down to the level of our neurons and the way we are seeing and hearing the world. And now, of course, the interesting question is, do we become friends because we process the world the same way, or do we change how we process the world as we spend time with people? And the jury's out on that. They were still finishing the study when I had to turn in my book. But I think the answer is probably a little of both, that you're sort of drawn to people who perceive the world the way you do. But then as you spend time together, we have evidence, for instance, that conversation can change the way your brain processes information that comes after and can kind of sync you up with someone. So our friendships really are getting right down to the level of our brain.
That's really fascinating. Now, one of the things that comes up for me as I'm reading about the biological aspects of friendship, the evolutionary aspects of it, the neuroscience, is thinking in terms of what friendship has turned into today, heavily relying on technology. Can you tell us a little bit about the effects on friendship?
Yeah, so this is really interesting. And when I started to write this book, everyone said, well, you're going to have to write all about social media and technology. And I was kind of dreading it because it seemed like such a morass and there was such strong feelings about it. But what was striking was that as I was finishing my reporting, there actually really was some strong, rigorous science that came out that made it pretty clear that the hysteria around how social media and technology might be damaging friendship and damaging our psychological well-being is overblown. It is hysteria. And it's not that there's no cause for concern, but that by and large, like on a population level, actually, mostly social media improves our social relationships. It's there's a bunch of different ways of measuring its effect on well-being, and relationships is one, and that tends to be positive on average. So what is also interesting, though, is that it's over time, people have looked at how we deal with our sort of closest relationships. And what they find is that as the world changes around us, and not just with technology, but even before that, when we started to have increased mobility, right, where people were much more likely to move across the country or something like that. And we have always protected our core relationships. And so I think the thing we need to recognize about friendship and social media and technology is that we know who the people closest to us are. And we know that our best friends are not the same thing as a Facebook friend that you never see or haven't seen in 30 years. Those are not equivalent. And so the word friend has not really been devalued, I don't think, by social media. It's just got some different definitions to it. It's tiered, maybe, is what you could say. And then the thing that happened, of course, is that the pandemic came, and we went from being completely freaked out about whether we were spending too much time on social media and whether it was warping our relationships to relying only on that. And what was interesting from a scientific perspective is that there was a whole lot, the kinds of questions that we wanted to answer were not things we knew or had studied, like how much more useful is a video chat than a phone conversation, because researchers had tried to study that, but had been having a hard time getting funding. And then when the pandemic hit, they got a whole lot of money to study this right away. So I think there's going to be some really interesting research coming out of this time of disconnection and isolation, to tell us more about what we get from social media and technology and what we don't. But what I think we can take away is that being connected in some form is better than not being connected. It is also true that connecting with people in person is really valuable, and it's different. So if I am looking at someone face to face in person, it's activating different parts of my brain than watching them on a video screen does. And it gets our sort of communication parts of our brain ready to go. And then you get all of your senses are operating when you're with someone in person, even touch and smell and things like that we don't think about. We're not sort of consciously aware necessarily that that's the case. But on technology, of course, it's not there. So there are things that technology can't give us. And what was interesting was that, different people responded in different ways. They found they preferred different things, different ways of connecting during the pandemic. And that's fine. Like, the real lesson of technology should be that people should be using it to connect with their friends in ways that make them happy and that feel satisfying to them. And, but it is also, it's just one channel, I guess, is the way to put it, of how we connect with our friends. And what we find is that people who use technology as one way of connecting, but other ways as well, in person, on the phone, different things, those are going to be the strongest relationships.
I've actually seen a room full of teenage boys sitting near each other, texting each other, and then hearing each other laugh. So, in some ways it can even be like the modern day version of passing notes, right? Yeah. So we're running out of time here, Lydia, but do you have one final message for us about the value of friendship?
It would be to reiterate some of the things I already said, that friendship is not a luxury. It's part of our infrastructure as human beings. It's part of why we evolved the way we have. And friends are really there to get us through the hard times. They help us live longer. They keep us healthier. And I think that the problem has been that we often think of friends as coming after family and work and our romantic partners. And that is not necessarily how it should be. So I give people permission to hang out with their friends and understand that they are doing something that is good for you and good for your friend. And that it really matters. And that we should prioritize that as we come out of the pandemic. We should not go back to our old ways. We should appreciate what we now can get back that we missed, and hang out with our friends.
It's a wonderful final message. Congratulations again, Lydia, on a fascinating book and on being a gold winner. And again, her book is entitled Friendship: The Evolution, Biology, and Extraordinary Power of Life's Fundamental Bond. Thanks, Lydia.
Thank you.